Hello and welcome to the budget briefing in association with EY. I'm Jim Power and we're recording in the wake of Budget 2024 being released. I'm joined today by Dr Loretta O'Sullivan, EY Ireland Chief Economist, and Deirdre Hogan, EY Ireland Tax Partner. So you're very welcome to go through the entrails of Budget 24 with me. Loretta, if I can start with you, obviously, for a small open Irish economy, global economic developments are incredibly important. Domestic economic developments are incredibly important. What do you think the sort of economic backdrop to the budget was looking like, and what were the two ministers really trying to achieve in this budget?
A lot going on in terms of the backdrop to the budget. I think the government was trying to adopt a Goldilocks approach, and by that I mean it was seeking to get things just right. It was looking to strike a balance between giveaway and prudence, between the short term and the long term, between the present and the future. Doing that with what we might call the three bears: households, businesses, economists, all looking over its shoulder. And getting it right in that context is tricky. So in terms of the economy, it's expected to grow, but at a more moderate rate. Inflation is easing, but cost of living pressures are still being felt. We are in a situation where the interest rate cycle, we're getting to the peak of that, but the impact of those past hikes is impacting. A situation also where we have strong employment, but at the same time labour constraints and infrastructure constraints, and then headwinds in terms of age and climate-related challenges. So a lot going on for the government, and what it was trying to do was strike a balance with it. I think it's a case, time will tell whether it succeeded in doing that or not, but that seemed to be the aim.
And looking at the global headwinds, what do you think the outlook for the global economy is going to be like over the next 12 months? Just before the budget was presented, we had the IMF's latest assessment of the global economy, which was quite downbeat. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think it's a case that it's fragile. There's some recovery there coming through, but it is fragile. We see a little bit of mixed picture across the different countries. So the US, for example, the economy has been maybe a little bit more resilient than had been expected. The Europe, again, mixed. We have some countries that are quite soft, such as Germany at the moment. As we go through to next year, though, they should see some of those inflationary pressures ease, and that will give a little bit of support and a lift to the economy. In the UK, fairly subdued. So overall, in terms of the global picture, it is a fragile recovery. And as a small open economy, Ireland is obviously going to be impacted by that. But there are strengths to the domestic economy as well that we've seen in recent times. That strong employment, for example, very important as a confidence factor when it comes to consumer spending. So we expect that's going to help. And overall, we do see the Irish economy growing, but it is going to be at a more moderate rate than what we've had for the last 2 years. We've in recent times we've seen a resilience, and we've seen a recovery from the shocks in terms of the war in Ukraine and COVID, a strong performance for the economy, and now some pullback from that.
In a sort of a macro sense, what did we see in the budget yesterday?
A range of measures, trying to strike that balance aimed at serving different objectives. So some cost of living measures around the energy credits, for example, so further energy credits. Measures in terms of social welfare, increases in the €12 increase, double Christmas bonus payments. We saw some cuts to taxation that differed across USC, and some movement in the bands. We've also seen measures for businesses to try and support businesses, so some SME supports there. A range of measures there for households, for businesses. A little bit more into the medium term, some supports around infrastructure and a continued focus on infrastructure, some measures to spur innovation like the R&D tax credit and changes on that front, and then measures aimed at the longer term, the announcement of 2 new funds.
Deirdre, turning to business and enterprise, what did we see in the budget yesterday?
Yeah, look, there was quite a bit in the budget yesterday, and I think, as Loretta just said, there was a lot to encourage innovation, which I think is really welcome. there was a 250 million package of temporary supports for businesses was announced, called the Increased Cost of Business Scheme. I think this is going to be really welcomed by small and medium enterprises, particularly because we know some of them have been having a tough time of it lately. So good to see that coming through. And I think the government estimates that the scheme could benefit up to 130,000 small and medium enterprises, basically by providing a tiered grant equivalent of up to half of business rates for the year. So I think that's going to be a very welcome measure for them.
And is there a limit on that?
No, it's the half the business rates.
Okay.
Yeah. And the R&D tax credit, I think, Loretta, you mentioned there as well. So the decision to increase the R&D tax credit from 25% to 30%, I think, was a really important step to preserve and boost the attractiveness of Ireland, particularly as a global hub for R&D, in what's really a competitive international environment at the moment. And I'll mention in a second, but that, again, in the context of kind of the BEPS Pillar 2 changes. So I think probably everyone's aware that it's been known for some time now that there's a 15% minimum effective tax rate coming in for large companies. That is those with consolidated revenue of over 750 million. That's going to be introduced shortly. And that's, being introduced to ensure Ireland remains compliant with the OECD Pillar 2 agreement. Next week, the specifics of that will be published in the finance bill. And, I think that's something we and all businesses are going to have to pay very close attention to. The devil will be in the detail, as they say, when it comes to that. I think Minister McGrath said it yesterday in his speech. That change, it's a once in a generational reform to our corporation tax system. And it's going to keep us and our clients, really busy, I would say, for some time to come in understanding the ramifications of that for our clients and indeed for our country, I think, Loretta. Just to point out there that the 15% rate, it's going to be levied via top-up tax and will only apply to those very large corporations over the threshold. So for the overwhelming majority of companies, there's going to be no change to the corporate tax rate. So just I think that is a good key differentiation there to be called out. What else did we see? So yeah, from an innovation perspective, we saw the new relief for angel investors. That's going to enable a reduced rate of capital gains tax on gains up to twice the value of the investments made by an investor. And I think that's really welcome. I think that should encourage, it's going to really encourage investments in startups and growing businesses, I suppose, from an Irish perspective, which is the aim. Because often those kind of small companies can find it difficult to access traditional methods of finance in the earlier years. And obviously costly finance as well at the moment is a factor. And then just the last kind of point, I suppose, there's two other points were around capital gains tax. So there's the increase in the upper age limit from 65 to 70 on the capital gains tax retirement relief. That's going to allow business owners much greater flexibility in terms of, the timing of the transfer of the business to their children and to ensure that this is done at the right time. So I think that's going to be welcomed by kind of the private market in Ireland. And then one of the last kind of main points, I suppose, was around the Key Employee Engagement Programme, otherwise known as KEEP. So the changes to the rules here, including extending the relief to 2025 and increasing the limit from 3 million to 6 million, that'll go some way to helping SMEs, to reward and retain key employees, and in particular those with the specialist skills needed to power our economy in the future. So I think that's a really good tool and a measure to introduce. If I step back, I suppose, taken in the whole, these announcements and many others, there was others, they demonstrate that the government, I suppose, is listening to not everyone, obviously, but to a lot of people, who are creating in our economy, creating jobs, creating employment, demand and supply. And, while it's never possible to meet all of the budget day demands, I think real progress was communicated in that kind of innovation SME space in yesterday's budget, and it's welcome news, I think.
Okay. 99% of businesses in Ireland are classified as SME, 65% of business employment. So it's an incredibly important part of the economy. And the pressures on that sector are very clear. For the hospitality sector, we saw the VAT rate going from 9 to 13.5 on the 1st September. We saw the minimum wage being increased, or a confirmation in the budget that it was going up by 12.4% to 12.70. Energy markets are still extremely nervous. Do you think enough has been done to help the SME sector in 2024 in what could be a pretty challenging year?
Yeah, I think everyone would say that there's always more that can be done, but I think we are in a full employment position in Ireland. I think businesses in general, there is demand, but I think a lot was done yesterday, and I think the release that we brought in should go a long way to helping those SMEs. And it was across, a range of measures too. So it wasn't just focused on any one sector or any one business. I think what was there was kind of broadly applicable, and I think is a really good step. And I think probably more than maybe was hoped for in some instances. Obviously, you mentioned the VAT, that up and down 9 to 13.5%. That didn't change again yesterday. But I think the measures that were brought in would be very welcome by the SME businesses.
Okay, Loretta, the overall package was 14 billion, which is a pretty stimulatory fiscal package by any stretch of the imagination. I guess the question that certainly struck me as I listened to the two ministers delivering the budget yesterday, there was a lot of measures thrown out there. Writing down all the items, you were filling up pages because there was so many small things. And it struck me that there was a real sort of scattergun approach here to fiscal policy. Was there anything that you would regard as strategic in the budget offering?
I think the piece around the establishment of the new funds and the announcement there was a step change, a step forward in that. So it's very much in the longer term space, and it's around trying to ensure the resilience of the public finances and the resilience of the economy. So the two new funds, the around investment and climate and nature, and the Future Ireland Fund. The intention is to put some money aside, so that piece, it was a lot of money that was put in, and some has been put aside then and saved and is looking to those future considerations. It is important around the infrastructure fund in particular. We're of an age, we remember boom and bust Ireland. So having a fund there that can kind of serve a counter-cyclical purpose in terms of infrastructure and provide certainty to the sector if we go through a downturn again, that they can see a way forward and can support capital projects. That is a change in terms of fiscal policy and the way we think about it. For a very long time, we have been talking about the costs that are coming in terms of an ageing population, in terms of pension costs, healthcare costs, long-term costs. I started my career in the Department of Finance doing demographic projections and looking at what the ageing population would mean for the public finances out the line. So from my personal perspective, I'm pleased to see a fund there that is recognising that and is putting some money aside to deal with those challenges. And of course, we have climate challenges now too, and that's going to involve lots of change, and there will be an element of cost to that in terms of mitigation. So putting that money being put aside, I think it is helpful. And more generally in terms of the budget, we saw that piece about trying to deal with the immediate pressures in terms of cost of living. We also saw some focus on the medium term, and what I mean by that is that investment in infrastructure, the investment in trying to boost the innovative and productive capacity of the economy. And that's important because it will help us address the supply bottlenecks, and addressing those is going to help with the inflation issue as well. So it's kind of that approach where they've done a bit of short term, a bit of medium term, a bit of long term. So, trying to strike that balance.
And in terms of housing, we didn't see a lot really, did we?
A bit there, and a couple of measures that will provide some support and that will help. I think housing, though, it has to be taken in the context of overarching. We have a national development plan, so we have a very big plan that's there around infrastructure. Housing is an important element of it. Also, transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and I mean, if we look at, say, what people like the National Competitiveness Council and Productivity would say in this, they would call out housing and energy as being areas of particular focus and where we need to invest. So there is a big investment plan there. Challenge and what we'd like to see over the coming years, and there's already lots of efforts to do this, of course, is really a focus on delivery and implementation on that.
Yeah. There was quite a bit of reaction to the tax changes for small private landlords. The opposition obviously not happy about it. Many landlords themselves are saying that it's too small, that if they sign up for this, they will have to stay in the market for 4 years, at which stage the property market may have turned down and they'll have missed the opportunity to get out what many believe to be close to the top of the market at the moment. So how do you stand on the treatment of private landlords? Do you think enough was done, or should anything have been done?
I think this is a little bit like what Deirdre was saying before. You're not going to satisfy everybody in a budget. The government can't. So some people will, and renters may have looked at this from one particular angle. Landlords will have looked at it from a different angle, from an economics angle, and from speaking as an economist. The important thing in terms of the housing market is we need supply and demand to be balanced. And that is going to solve an awful lot of the problems that may be in rental, in owner-occupied, in social housing, affordable housing. We need more supply coming on stream. So in that broader context, that's what we need to see, more delivery, more units coming on stream to try and balance the issues there. And I think that will take the heat out of it for various constituents.
Deirdre, there were some changes for businesses in the area of VAT.
Yeah, it was probably the most exciting budget from a VAT perspective in years. I was saying we had a few cue cards full of small measures, but no, I think, the biggest one really, and it wasn't a measure itself, but it was just an indication by the Minister that a public consultation is going to be conducted by the Revenue Commissioners on the modernisation of the VAT system. So just a step back, I suppose, the EU introduced a proposal last year that would mandate all EU jurisdictions to introduce electronic invoicing and real-time reporting in all EU member states for all businesses that operate cross-border, and leaving it discretionary on domestic transactions. So what the Minister did yesterday is say that Ireland is basically looking at this now. The EU proposal is that it's going to happen between 2024 and 2028, but that hasn't been ratified by the Commission yet. So I thought it was really interesting that the Minister flagged that Ireland is going to look at this regardless, I would say, of VIDA, which is the VAT and the Digital Age proposal, and that they're going to welcome consultation. So that's going to be a huge change for Irish businesses and for how businesses transact and invoice their customers and their clients. It'll necessitate changes to data quality, to process and controls within businesses, and also to their IT infrastructure. So a lot of Irish companies wouldn't be set up at the moment to implement electronic invoicing. And so by opening up that public consultation, it is going to give companies the opportunity to express their concerns to the Revenue Commissioners about what this might look like. And it'll give the Revenue Commissioners an opportunity to understand from an Irish perspective what those concerns are and how that might tie into what the EU Commission is proposing from a standardised approach to e-invoicing. So that's a very big change. Again, it's only indicating the change. The actual measures aren't going to be in place for quite a while, I would say. But I would encourage all businesses to actually understand what e-invoicing is, understand the EU Commission, and then to actively feed into that consultation process, because it gives them a chance to voice their concerns and really to kind of drive the direction within certain boundaries of how the government might introduce modernisation of the VAT system in Ireland. So I think that was really interesting to see as a VAT practitioner. Some other measures, I think, nothing major, but the VAT thresholds, I guess if we're looking back to the supports for small and medium-sized enterprises, the Minister did announce that the VAT registration thresholds for goods and services would be increased. So it's the first time since 2008 that they've been increased. So it's not quite in line with inflation. For services, it's going from €37,500 to €40,000. And for goods, it's going from €75,000 to €80,000. But what that does increase the threshold by which you can take businesses out of the VAT net. So your really small businesses won't be caught by the VAT net, and they won't be stuck with the, I guess, quite onerous obligations of reporting and paying over VAT. I looked it up and I just saw that in 2008, when they brought in the last changes, which were of a similar size, it took 2,700 businesses out of the VAT net, and I think it only cost around 20 million to the Exchequer. So again, I think that's really good news for small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think just to point out, kind of in a nod to the Irish government, within the EU you have certain thresholds that you can, maximum thresholds in this space, and they are one of the few EU countries who are quite high up in terms of having a threshold for registration. Some jurisdictions have no thresholds at all. So again, they are looking to kind of take care of those small businesses from an Irish tax perspective.
Okay, interesting. I can't believe that was 2008, because I remember it well. getting old. There was a little bit of a sting in the tail in the budget that didn't attract a lot of attention yesterday. The Minister just threw it in as a sort of an afterthought, really, from the 1st of October next year. And I'm taking you out of the area of VAT now into a different area of taxation. The 0.1% increase in all PRSI rates next October to pay for the decision politically they had to take not to increase the state retirement age.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, look, that's a very sensitive topic. I mean, I think the government had flagged, many years ago they were going to increase the retirement age to 68. They did row back on that. And look, ultimately, as Loretta pointed out, we've got an aging demographic, and we are going to have to pay for that somehow. So, a 0.1% increase in the PRSI is small. It's not going to do much in that space, but I think it is an indication of where the government's going to have to go. So it was a tiny little, as you said, a sting in the tail, but ultimately, what other options do we have at the moment? And we are, unfortunately, that's where it's not unfortunately, we're all going to live longer, right? So that's a good thing, but how we're going to pay for those supports is a problem.
They have sort of identified the direction of travel.
Yeah, I would think so.
Expect more.
Yeah, and there was clearly a recognition, and the Minister said these are known costs, and so they're reflecting that, I think, a little bit in the movement on the PRSI and also in the establishment of the fund, because these costs are coming and they will have to be dealt with.
Loretta, having worked in the Department of Finance, as you said earlier in your career, we've had a lot of warnings recently about the vulnerability of corporation tax, and the fiscal projections that were presented in the budget yesterday have the headline general government balance and then the general government balance when you exclude volatile corporation tax. Well, I was looking at the medium term projection for corporation tax, and 23.6 billion I think this year, and by 2026 they're still expecting to be collecting between 25 and 26 billion. So although they've sent out all these warnings, they're still projecting on the basis that the corporate tax take will hold up. Would you feel comfortable with that?
Yes, I think that over the next couple of years, our expectation, government's expectation, finance's expectation is that the economy is going to grow. So, and the various aspects of the economy going to grow. We've seen a little bit of softness in the corporation tax receipt lately. That can be explained to some extent by what's happening with the conversation we started with, the fragile global economy, for example, and also that some of the multinational sectors, so the pharmaceutical and the ICT sector in particular, are going through a little bit of adjustment at the moment. So these were clearly the sectors that were outperformers during COVID. They are unwinding from that and they're adjusting to the new post-pandemic external environment. So there's a little bit of adjustment taking place at the moment. But if we look at the numbers and think about corporation tax, we see that it's been very strong. So we have to put any softness in the context of those very strong numbers. We should also be aware that there has been a huge amount of investment in recent years, and that investment will come through in terms of exports over the coming years, will come through then in terms of the receipts and the take. So we wouldn't be overly worried at this point. We do see that there's some strengths in the economy and that it will continue to grow, and the multinational sectors will be part of that. Deirdre mentioned that there will be changes in terms of the international tax rate, the BEPS coming on stream. So there will be an increase for some companies to 15%, up from the 12.5% at the moment. So that's going to provide an additional piece of revenue. Not to be complacent about it, there is another dimension to that international corporation tax agreement that's further down the line, and that Ireland will have to look at. So, I mean, there are risks around this. We know that, but for the next couple of years, we think it should be in reasonably okay.
Okay. Finally, if I could ask you, Budget 2024 was the last budget before European and local elections, so obviously it was heavily influenced by politics. It's most probably the second last budget ahead of the next general election. So will we be sitting here this time next year talking about another strong giveaway budget?
I don't know. I know economists, we do forecasts, but I mean, no, I'm not sure that I have a crystal ball here to give an answer on the political.
I guess the point I'm really trying to make is, do you think 12 months down the road, okay, the political imperative will be very strong? Do you think the economy and the public finances will support another budget larger probably than what we've seen in budget 2024?
I think what we will see is an economy that is growing. Our expectation would be an economy also where inflation has come down and some of those cost of living pressures have come off. So there may not be a need to provide as much support on that side. To the extent that the economy is growing, yes, tax receipts, and there will be pressures in terms of spending across a range of areas. The NDP is there in terms of the infrastructure piece. So I think what they'll be trying to do is put all that through the surplus projections that you have seen. When you looked at what finance and government are projecting, is that they are looking at having a surplus again next year. It'll be a political decision where they go with that. Yeah. But probably a marker has been laid down here in terms of spend and save.
I was going to add to that I think the risk for this government probably has been all of these one-off measures that have been replicated every year. So while they're positioned as one-off measures, I think there will be an expectation that there'll be double child benefit, that there will be Christmas bonuses, all of those kind of one-off measures. So even though they're positioned as one-off measures, like if they're not there next year, I think the government could, face criticism for that potentially, and then going into election year, it may sway their thinking in terms of what they do. But as Loretta said, no crystal balls, and I guess it'll depend on a lot of factors over the course of the year in terms of how the finances shape up.
Okay, interesting times ahead. Listen, thank you very much, Deirdre Hogan, Loretta O'Sullivan, for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to the post-budget 2024 briefing in association with EY. We hope you enjoyed it, and best of luck in 2024.